And this is where you as the admins can go to customize the database. So you have a lot of information under system configuration to access. So if I click on here, you're going to see all the different tabs. So you can see you have your security tab, preferences, data management, forms, and advanced. So today we're going to focus on security because these are tied to the people in your system. So you have your security user, the roles and permissions, groups, and notification logs. Focus first on roles and permissions. So if I click on the roles and permissions right now, it's going to take us into a search screen and it's going to list all the information tied to the roles. So like I mentioned earlier, there's 3 roles that are in top performance. You have your admin role, your employee role, and your manager role. On the search screen, it's going to list all the information out in rows. And within each row, you're going to see some information. So you're going to have the name of the role, a simple description for the role. You're going to see how many users are assigned to each role, the type of role it is, the status of the role, whether it's active or inactive. And then you're going to notice you have these, what we refer to as row actions. So you can take some action on a specific row of information. And you're going to notice when we go into the different modules, all the search screens are basically going to follow the same setup. Easy to quickly learn the information because they all work the same way. So if we want to take a look at, say, the employee role here, we want to see the 83 users that are in this role and what's involved in the role. If I click anywhere in the row here, it's going to open up an overlay panel where you can access some additional information. I'm going to click on it, and here you can see this is the overlay panel, and you can see there's 3 tabs of additional information. So you can see the details of the role. So basically, it's going to tell you it's the employee role, this is the description, all this information. And you'll notice there's this little default chip next to it. When you're adding people to the system, they have to have a role assigned to them because in order for them to access top performance, the system needs to know where to take them. So they have to have a role assigned to them. So the system automatically assigns the default role to them. And then from there, you as the admin can change that or add additional roles, etc. So that's why this shows as default. And you can change whichever employee role you want as the default role. And then if you need to change anything, you can just click edit and you can make certain changes here. Then if I go to the user tab, this is going to list out all the users in your database that are tied to this role. So you can see them all listed here. And you have a keyword search. So if you want to search by a certain user, a certain location, a certain position, you can do that. You also have the ability to assign users right from this overlay panel. Then the next one is the permissions. And this is where you go to tell the system what the employees tied to this role can access and what they can do. And if I click on this, you're going to see it's basically tied to the navigation menu, the different modules in the system. So like we had the admin dashboard, here's the dashboard for the employees. So you can tell the system what they can see and what they can access. And then if you're using the goals module, you can enable that or disable that. So if I were to expand the goals module, just so you can see the different permissions here, you can see how it's set up. Can the employee view goals? Can they manage goals? Meaning, can they add their own goals? Can they edit existing goals? Can they delete goals? Depending on what you want them to do, you can click edit and then you can modify these permissions. So maybe you decide, yeah, they can view goals and they can add and edit goals, but I don't want them deleting goals. So that way you can disable that particular permission, and then all they can do is view and manage. They won't be able to delete any goals. And then you can save that. And then if I expand it, you can see now they don't have access anymore. So if we were to log in as an end user that was tied to this role, they wouldn't be able to delete their goals. And then you can do the same thing with the different development plans. You can do the same thing. There's some additional permissions tied to development plans, but you can see the different options here. So survey, can they view and complete surveys? Can they print surveys? So you would determine what particular permissions the individuals have. Now, One thing to note with these permissions and these roles, you can have multiple roles in the system. So for instance, you may have legal and staff. You can create two different employees, one for legal and one for staff, because they may have different access. Maybe the attorneys have goals assigned to them that they need to complete, but the staff doesn't. So in that instance, you wouldn't necessarily enable the goals module. You could disable this whole thing because the staff doesn't need access to that because they don't have goals assigned to them. So if you disable this, then when they log into the portal, they wouldn't even see that. And then you can quickly add additional roles by using these row actions. So if I click on these row actions, you see how you have the ability to copy the role. And you can also assign users right from the search screen too. So if I click copy role right now, I can create a new role based off of this existing role. And I can call it whatever I want. So I could say, like we were using staff, I could say employee staff. And then I can say staff role. And then you can pull in all the users on the existing process, but we may not necessarily want that because we're creating a new role. So I can just save it as is. And now you can see here's that new role and there's no users assigned to it currently. And then if I click into it, now if I wanted to, I can change the permission. So if I click edit, I can say they're not going to use goals because they're not going to be assigned any goals, so I'm going to take that away from them and save it. So now you have two different employee roles with different permissions. One has access to goals, the other one doesn't. So you can see how you can change things depending on what kind of access the employees need, depending on who they are. I want to log in as an employee, so you can see the difference between the admin view and the employee view. So I'm going to log in as my employee, Michaela. And now when Michaela logs in, she's going to be brought to a dashboard. And you can see it looks pretty similar to the admin dashboard. She has her task status bar here. She can see how many tasks she's got assigned. Here's a little message that the admin populated, so she can see that. And there's some other tiles she can see. And again, this is totally customizable by the admins. They can pick and choose what tiles are relevant to their employees. But you'll notice on her navigation menu, she doesn't have as many options as an admin does because she's basically just going in here, accessing her information and working on the tasks that she was assigned. So she doesn't have all the other modules that the admin does. So she basically has her dashboard, her goals, if she has any goals she needs to work on, her development plans, any tasks. And again, by tasks, I'm referring to evaluations, self-evals, etc. Then if she has any surveys, she can come in here, access her surveys that she was assigned to complete. And then again, she has access to preferences. This is where she can go and change her password, etc. This is how those permissions are set up. They're set up based on the navigation menu. So you would decide what the employee has access to at any given time here. And again, like I said, you can create multiple employee roles and different employees have access to different information. One set of employees has access to goals, the other set of employees doesn't have access to goals. And you can see here for Michaela, I've uploaded her picture, so the picture displays here instead of just the avatar. So now let's take a look at the admin role so you can see the different permissions here. So again, if I click in the row, it's going to open up the overlay panel. If I go to the user, it's going to show the users I currently have assigned to the admin role. And now if I access the permissions for the admin role here, you can see how there's a lot more permissions here. So you have the dashboard, you have People Central, goals, development plans, process, client matters, surveys. You can see all the different access you have. Again, if I use the scenario of legal and staff, they'll create multiple admin roles because the different admins may not necessarily have to do the same work in Top Performance. So they'll create multiple admin roles, and based on what they need to do in the system, they'll give them different access. So for instance, maybe a particular admin isn't going to access any of the system configuration settings. They're just going to go in and go into People Central, maybe go into the process and build out processes. So all this information will be removed from their admin role because they don't need it. They also may not need access to the library. So you can get very granular with these permissions and who can access what within. So for instance, if I enable People Central here, you can see all the different permissions tied alone to People Central here. And the first one is salary and accounting information. In Top Performance, you can track salary information. You may not want all admins to see that information. So by building out additional admin roles, you can then give access to certain admins, but certain admins won't see this information when they log in. They'll access People Central, they'll be able to see the employee information and all, but they won't be able to see any of the salary information. So if I click into security user, you're going to see it's going to list out all the users and it's going to have information. So it's going to list out the name, the avatar, the user ID, whether they're active or inactive. And this is that verified button, whether their email address has been verified or not. So this is another way admins reach out and say the person can't get into the system. You can come here and check to see if the email address was verified or not, because if it wasn't, you can verify it. And then here you have your row actions again. And if I click on the row actions, again, you have another way of deactivating them. You can also assign roles here to the people. You can assign groups. You can require a password reset. If you want them to have to reset their password, you can do that. Similar to the roles and permissions, if I click into the row here, it's going to open up the overlay panel. And it's basically going to give some information about this particular individual. It's going to list their username, whether they're active or inactive. This is where you as the admin can change their password. So the individual can always reset their password on the login screen. But if they reach out to you for whatever reason and want you to change it, you as the admin can do that here. Then if I go to the roles, you can see the roles that were assigned to the user. You can also change the role and assign new roles. This is where you would see what groups they're assigned to. You would also see the last time they access Top Performance, which is helpful if you're in a process and you've reached out to them, they haven't, you can see whether they access the system or not. If I click on the row actions up here, these three dots up, you'll see you also have the ability, once you're in the overlay panel, to assign roles, assign groups, deactivate users, require the password reset. And then this one, this re-verify email manually. This is helpful because sometimes, even though they're verified here, when the end user goes to log in, they can't log in. It says they're not verified. And usually there's like an issue with Cognito. Cognito wasn't updated correctly. So even though it says yes here, they still can't log in. If I come up here and I click re-verify email manually, it like updates the record. So it updates on the Cognito end and then they can log back into the system. So that's very helpful to know. And again, similar to the other search screens, you have a keyword search, you have your filter here, so you can search and narrow down. You can search by unverified or all. You can search by different statuses. You can search by different roles. You also have your columns here. You can pull in additional information, and you also have your saved views if you need to. And then if I select different users, again, you have your mass actions. So if I click on the action button, you can assign roles in mass. So if you create a new role and you want to assign the role to everybody, you can just come here, select the user you want, and assign that role all at the same time. So I can say assign role, and I could say maybe that staff one. And now I've just added that role to all of them. So if I wanted to, I could look at Adele and I could see that she's assigned the employee role. And if I want, I can remove the other role from her. If you were to keep both roles on a person's profile or here, what would happen is the permissions, the higher permissions would take precedent. So if on the employee role, she had access to goals, but on the employee staff role, she didn't have access to goals because she was assigned this role, she would have access to goals. It's always the higher permissions take precedent. What Groups does, it's just a way to categorize your users based on certain criteria in the system. Currently, the only functionality that Groups has is when you're building out your processes, you can assign administrators to the process, either individually or based on groups. So you can create a group of admins. The group is dynamic. So depending on if people meet the criteria or don't meet the criteria anymore, they'll either be added or fall off of that group. What I want to do is I actually want to show you how to create a group, because the way you create a group using criteria is the same way you're going to create your participants when we're building out a process, just so you get familiar with it. I'm going to click Add. First thing we're going to do is we're going to assign a name to our group, and you can, whatever description you want, I'll just say all associates. Then when I click Next, this is where you're going to add criteria to specify who's going to get pulled into this group. So once I click Add Criteria, you're going to have a little drop down here, and you have all these different options to pick how you're going to pull your employees into this group. So because I said this is associates, that's a position. I'm going to use the position criteria. So I'm going to say position is, and I'm going to grab associates. And I can also turn it around. I could say position is not, if it's easier to narrow it down either way. Then I can add additional filters. So I can say position is associate, and I could say hire date, and I have all these options. So I can say hire date is on or before, say, September or something like that. So I'm not pulling in new associates for some reason if I wanted to. Or I could pick any of these. I could do office, department, etc. So I can use all this to narrow down the information. But I'm just going to say position is associate. I'm going to keep it very simple. Then if I wanted to, I could create a separate criteria. Say criteria 2, position is attorney, and I could separate it out. I'm going to pick position is associate. And then what's going to happen is if I click Next, it's going to list out all the people that are going to get pulled into this group based on the criteria I picked. So you can see all these people are associates in the system, and you can see the criteria used by. And then once I click Submit, that creates my group. And then if I wanted to, I could see my users here. So these are all the users that I pulled in. You can see they're pulled in by criteria. Then you're going to notice there's this little icon here, and it basically gives you the ability to convert them to an override user. So if I click on that, what that'll do is Michaela is now pulled into this group based on criteria as well as an override. So if Michaela, say, gets a promotion or she becomes partner or something like that, she no longer fits the criteria, so she's going to get removed from it. But because I pulled her in as an override as well, even if she gets removed from the criteria, she's still going to be in this group because I pulled her in as an override. So she won't get removed from the group unless I go and take away that override. Then if she no longer meets the criteria, then she's going to get pulled out of that. But like I said, currently, groups are only used when you're building out your process. If you want to assign process administrators via that group, you can do that. But I just wanted you to see how to create the group via that criteria. So the last thing under security is notification logs. And this is basically just where you would go to see what emails were sent out of the system. You launch a process and somebody hasn't completed their task and you reach out to them, they say they never got the email, you can come in here and you would be able to see what they did. Like if somebody reached out to you and said, I'm trying to reset my password, I didn't get it, you can come here and say, well, the system sent it to you, so check your spam, etc. if it went in there. And again, you have your filters here. You'll notice right now we only have the type of password recovery, but once we start building out processes and different things like that, you're going to see all the different type notifications that you can search on. And you can also search on recipient, sender, a certain time.